Why your thoughts aren't really yours. Alan Watts. Here's the unkind confession most of us never say aloud. The voice in your head is a crowded room. It calls itself me, but it speaks in borrowed accents. You think your thoughts are original because you've grown used to the feeling of their footsteps' familiar creaks in an old house, but if you listen closely, you can hear the echoes of teachers, parents, headlines, prayers, songs from supermarkets, slogans from billboards, a book you loved when you were 12, a fear your grandfather smuggled into a family joke. We call it thinking. But it's closer to remembering, assembling, repeating. You are not a soloist. You are a choir that forgot it was a choir. Alan Watts had a smile that made dangerous truths sound like invitations. He enjoyed sliding a pin into a balloon and calling the pop enlightenment. One of his favorite punctures was this: the I you imagine to be the captain of thought is itself a thought, a trick of grammar, a habit of attention. He would say it with a warm mischief, as if revealing how a magic trick works without killing the wonder. We speak a sentence, I am thinking, and because the language separates subject from verb, we start to believe the separation is real. The I becomes a manager, thoughts become employees, and our days become performance reviews. Productive, unproductive, appropriate, shameful. Stop and notice how early this began. A child learns words like a shoreline, learns waves repetition, turns erosion into shape. Before memory even discovers the calendar, the child inherits a map. Names for things, names for herself. A sense of what counts, what does not, when to speak, and when to swallow. The earliest sentences carry furniture into the house of the mind. Tables called good people, chairs called success, ornaments labeled sin or cool or normal. By the time the child is old enough to claim a personality, much of the house has already been decorated. She thinks she picked the wallpaper. She didn't. Someone handed her a roll and said, "This is who we are." History added its signatures. There was a time when most thoughts were not private but public, when the village and its God spoke louder than the inward whisper. Then the printing press multiplied pages, and pages multiplied people who could read alone. The Bible moved from pulpit to pocket. Confession shifted from priest to diary. Interior life swelled, and with it a new assumption grew, that a person was a sovereign territory behind the forehead, a kingdom of opinions bordered by skin. Descartes declared, "I think, therefore I am," as if thinking were a deed that proved citizenship in reality. It was tidy, efficient, useful, and incomplete. It confused the noise of the mind for the origin of being. The industrial world loved the new kingdom. It could be counted. Schools standardized subjects. Rulers standardized measures. Workers standardized hours. A factory hum seeped into language. Production, output, efficiency, improvement. Soon the inner voice learned to talk like a foreman. It took inventory of moods. It filed happiness under deliverables. It called anxiety a flaw to be optimized out of existence. And the marketers arrived with bright banners for the walls of the private kingdom. Think different. Just do it, because you're worth it. The slogans repeated until they became weather. You thought because thinking was obligatory. You chose because choice was proof of life. Watts never mocked the kingdom. He simply walked to the back door and pointed at the sea beyond the fence. He said, "What you call you is not a bounded container guarding private thoughts. The self is more like a wave in the ocean of life. It is unique and unrepeatable in shape. Yes, but it is made of water that does not belong to it. Thoughts are that water. They rise, crest, break, and dissolve. The wave doesn't make the ocean. The ocean makes the wave." This is not a paradox to be admired and then ignored. It is a practical suspicion. Watch a thought arrive. You did not schedule it. You did not house train it. It appeared with the confidence of a stray cat that has learned your porch is kind. Listen to the accent. Whose is it? The way it scolds you. Doesn't it sound like somebody you loved who loved you poorly? The way it flatters you, doesn't it echo a sales pitch that worked once? The way it breaks your heart with hypothetical catastrophes, where did it study its craft? It's easier to believe you invented every sentence than to admit you are porous. But you are porous. That is how air works. That is how stories work. If thoughts aren't really yours, does that mean you're a puppet loaded with anonymous scripts? That nightmare is why we cling so fiercely to authorship. We want to believe there is a central executive sitting honestly in a chair, signing laws with a fountain pen called will, benevolent and decisive. The truth is more unruly and more forgiving. There is leadership in you, but it's not the leadership of a tyrant. It is the leadership of a garden. Selection, patience, attention, weeding, watering. You don't invent seeds. You choose which ones to encourage. You don't own the ring. You cooperate. Under the fluorescent lights of modern life, the borrowed nature of thought feels like an insult. We are told originality is the highest nobility. Derivative minds are embarrassing. We forget what jazz knows. Nothing is new except the way you listen, the way you join the song, the timing of your entrance, the courage to leave space. You are not less real because your thoughts have ancestors. You are more real when you recognize them. Pretending you thought everything first makes you paranoid and lonely. Admitting the river frees you to swim. There is another, subtler trap disguised as humility. If my thoughts aren't mine, I'll stop trusting them. But mistrust turns quickly into self-hatred, and self-hatred is just another borrowed rhythm sold to you by a culture that profits when you feel broken. Watts would tilt his head and ask, gently, who is the you that mistrusts the thought? Notice the trick. The inner voice plays both villain and sheriff. It throws a rock through the window and then accuses you of the crime. The way out is not to arrest more suspects. It is to question the sheriff. We are taught to wrestle with thoughts, to argue them into submission. Try this experiment. Do not think of a white bear. You will discover the bear has been waiting for this invitation for years. It stands up, waves a paw, asks what's for lunch. Fight and you feed it. Ignore it and it starts to yawn. This is not a hack. It's a physics. Attention is nourishment. You are the kitchen. What you attend to grows in your pantry. But don't mistake this for asceticism. To starve is not to be free. Freedom is knowing you are not obligated to eat every thought that appears. Walk the antique halls of your mind like a museum at closing time. Look, a display case of insults you didn't deserve, and next to it a gilt-framed painting of a compliment you never felt safe to believe. Here is a placard describing your family's official stance on silence. Over there, a shelf of rules for romance written by strangers, all beginning with real men and good women. You thought you were a curator. You were also a collector. You thought you were a guest. You were also an exhibit. Realizing this is not despair. It is power. It means the doors are, and maybe always were, unlocked. Alan Watts was not the first to say that you are larger than your thoughts, nor the last to be accused of making it sound too easy. He was careful to keep laughter in it. Laughter loosens the knots. If you can grin at the voice that tells you you're not allowed to grin, you've already stepped half a pace out of the trance. The descent into this question, whose thoughts are these, does not end with a neat thesis. It ends with a felt shift, a widening, a relief, a suspicion that the I who speaks so loudly about being the doer is a talented storyteller introduced to you when you are too young to audition other narrators. Tonight, let's begin. Not with war, not with worship of silence, but with the soft rebellion of honesty. Admit how many of your most important thoughts were handed to you in tones you couldn't refuse. Admit how often your inner narrator borrows costumes. Admit that you have been, at times, a mouth through which a nation, a family, a market, or a wounded memory spoke. Then breathe. The breath doesn't ask who owns it. The breath doesn't need a pronoun. There is life under the library. There is a sea behind the fence. So you listen, not to silence, but to the murmur, the clatter, the marketplace of your own head. You notice how thoughts arrive already dressed, already arguing. One declares a verdict. Another cross-examines. A third whispers gossip about your future like an anxious neighbor. You used to believe the courtroom belonged to a single judge. Now you see a rotating cast, powdered wigs and all, each claiming legitimacy, each insisting that you, the defendant, must accept the sentence or appeal to yet another court inside you. It is exhausting to be your own legal system. If all this is tedious, understand, the tedium is part of the spell. The mind's noise is like fluorescent hum. After a while you don't hear it, but it keeps everything too bright. Watts suggested that instead of arguing with the hum, you include it. Not stop thinking, that command is a trap door that drops you into worse rooms, but watch thinking. Let it keep doing what it does while you study its weather. Clouds do not cease to exist because you've learned their names. Storms do not apologize. They pass. Your job is to become sky. Our parents, without malice, put weather in our sky. Their fears, their hopes, the phrases they leaned on when the world was too sharp. Be careful. Don't get your hopes up. Make me proud. Be the man of the house. We don't talk about that. Each sentence is a script. By the time we leave home, we have a stack of scripts for every stage. We improvise small lines, call it my choice, and ignore the stage directions under our feet. When to smile, how to grieve, which gods to suspect, where to hide the pain. This is not a conspiracy. It is how animals teach their young to survive. But survival is not the same as freedom. Language, for all its beauty, is a cage with velvet bars. It cuts the world into pieces and hands you labels, then convinces you the labels are the pieces. It invents a character named I, credits it with every action, and then bullies it when the actions misbehave. This is only partly a problem. We need words to pass the salt and to declare love. The trouble begins when we believe the map is the landscape. We drown in should, sink under always, get lost in never, mistake the echo for the mountain that made it. Watts liked to toy with this by moving his words around until they took their paws off your throat. You don't have a life, he laughed. You are life happening. The grammar shifts. So does the pressure. Meanwhile, history keeps slipping coins into the machine. A century ago, a clever man taught companies how to sell dreams to desires that people didn't know they had. He called it shaping public opinion. The word propaganda became unfashionable, so we renamed it public relations, branding, influence. It's not that humans became stupider. The scripts became smoother. They learned to sound like your own voice. The ad speaks in your cadence. The politician quotes your grandmother. The news anchor mirrors your outrage back at you like a comforting sweater. Your mind, trying to be hospitable, opens another guest room. Soon you're running a hotel with no vacancies. Algorithms are new, but the logic is old. Tell a person that their worth depends on a fiction beauty that never ages, success that never stumbles, certainty that never doubts, and they will spend decades renting space to thoughts that promise to pay that debt. The promise is always almost there, almost enough, almost safe. The inner voice learns a new refrain. Keep scrolling, keep buying, keep proving, keep winning debates with strangers you'll never meet, because the debate is not with them. It's with a childhood fear that no one shook your hand and told you, you belong. Notice how much your thinking changes when you're scared. The sentences become shorter, the pictures in your head more dramatic, the villains larger than their shadows. Fear shrinks the vocabulary. Hope expands it. Hunger distorts the angles. Love softens them. Body and thought are not separate factories. They are one ecology. Feed the body badly. Sit under false light for too long. Never touch a tree or a hand, and the thoughts will complain without knowing what they're complaining about. Healers say, go for a walk, not as a consolation prize, but because the mind is an organ of the body, not a ghost imprisoned inside it. Personal history layers on top of cultural history, and the weave becomes tight. The tone of a mother's voice when she was tired becomes your inner critic's accent. The thrill of a teacher's praise becomes your productivity app's siren. The half-remembered sermon about sinners becomes the way you scold your desires. Each thread is understandable. None is final. The trouble begins when you mistake the weave for your skin. At this point, many people do something catastrophic disguised as noble. They declare war on thinking. They try to bulldoze the city of mind, to evacuate the sermons, to silence the radio. They sit on cushions like generals. They mistake the temporary relief of quiet for the permanent solution of peace. Watts would pour more tea, and with a twinkle that kept you from hardening, suggest another approach. Don't fight the city. Find the observer who is not a person sitting in a tower, but the openness in which towers are possible. When you chase the mind out of its own house, it disguises itself and moves back in with a fake mustache. When you watch it without hostility, it loses interest in upsetting you for sport. There's a phrase he used: play, the antidote to grim management. Play does not mean trivial. Children play to learn gravity, friendship, limits. Artists play to crack open reality and pour light through the seam. When you play with thinking, you stop asking it to guarantee your existence. You let it be a toolkit, not a tyrant. You inquire, is this thought helpful now? Is it kind? Is it true? Not in the courtroom's voice, but in the kitchen's. Will this recipe nourish? If not, set it aside. If yes, cook with it. Eat with friends. The mind resists this soft authority because it has been taught to respect only force. Prove it, it demands. Show me a contract. Show me a plan. The plan is simple and scandalous. Notice and allow. Thoughts are weather. Identity is sky. The sky is not a thing leaning against your ribs. It is a metaphor for the space of awareness that doesn't need to cling. You can test this. The next time the inner monologue begins a familiar sermon about how you failed, about how they're wrong, about how you need to rehearse the argument again, ask yourself, in a voice that sounds less like a judge and more like a friend, who is hearing this? If you were the sentence, you would not be able to hear the sentence. If you were the storm, you wouldn't see the edges of the storm. There is a you that is older than the language pretending to own you. This older you is not romantic. It doesn't float. It isn't a wise old guru perched behind your eyes. It is simply the capacity to notice. In that noticing, ridiculously simple and outrageously hard, something shifts. You are no longer hypnotized into believing every thought's claim of urgent authority. The inner world becomes more like a radio many stations, some useful, some absurd, some cruel, some beautiful. You learn to tune. You learn to turn it off. You learn that the silence between songs is not an enemy. It's how music breathes. History can't be left out of this breathing. The words we inherit carry fingerprints. Some were used to justify cruelty. Some were polished by saints trying to name what they loved. When you speak inside yourself, you are never alone with your own inventions. You are participating in a long conversation. That realization can make you defensive. I don't want anyone else's words in my mouth. Or it can make you tender. You get to decide which voices to honor. You get to decide whose ghosts you feed. You get to set places at your table for ancestors who knew how to hold grief without turning it into a weapon. For rebels who refused to memorize the catechism of hatred. For comedians who deflated pompous inner tyrants with a grin. And you get to let others leave. You do not need to keep renting rooms to bullies, even if the bullies speak your family name. You do not need to keep paying worship to an inner marketplace that sells you panic in bright packaging. The price of this eviction is small and enormous. You stop finding your identity in the loudest thought. The old fear stirs. Without them, who am I? And there it is, the hinge. If you can sit in that question without sprinting, the room opens. Not because an answer lands like a dove, but because the need for an answer relaxes. Alan Watts was a musician with words, and his melody accompanied this revelation. You are not the skin-encapsulated ego trying to pilot a heavy machine through a hostile universe. You are the universe looking out of two eyes, tasting itself through a mouth, thinking with a brain it grew for the purpose. In that light, my thoughts becomes our thoughts, not as a collectivist command, but as a nod to the obvious fact that minds bloom in sunlight they didn't invent. When you stop hoarding the title deeds to your inner sentences, when you stop pretending the library is your private property, your membership card changes. You get to be a citizen of a larger country. A morning arrives, which is to say, you notice that morning has been arriving all along, and the internal narrator is quieter, not gone, not exiled, just less certain that it is king. You make tea and realize you are not narrating the making. Water, kettle, flame, sound, steam, warmth, cup. The thoughts pass like birds moving through a frame. One perches, you should be doing more, and you nod to it the way you nod to an overeager acquaintance, and you continue stirring. Another bird lands, call your sister, and you notice your chest soften. You finish the tea. You make the call. You don't need to hold a debate about whether you are a good person for making the call. You just call. This is what begins to happen when you see that your thoughts aren't really yours. You become gentler with them. You don't require them to come with credentials. You don't panic when they're foolish. You stop using them as weapons against yourself. Paradoxically, this makes the thoughts better company. Creativity sneaks in through the window because the guard has stopped barking. Strangeness feels less like a threat and more like a new spice. The territory you had mistaken for a fortress becomes a garden again. You get dirt under your nails. You laugh more. Not because the world has improved its manners, but because you stopped believing your inner weather report is the climate. There is a freedom here that isn't traumatic enough for the billboard, but is sturdy enough for life. You no longer have to pretend that your best ideas arrived from a mountain on a clear night, delivered by a haloed messenger named originality. You can admit your influences, your debts, your borrowings. That admission turns out to be the door to creativity's workshop. When you aren't straining to be the first, you start being the truest. Originality becomes what it always was. Sincerity meeting the moment with whatever tools it has gathered, however mixed their origins. Jazz again, improv is honesty. And compassion, which we like to reserve for campaigns and hashtags, wanders into your kitchen. If your thoughts aren't entirely yours, maybe theirs aren't entirely theirs. The person on the street yelling into their phone, the uncle at the dinner table reciting a chain email as if it were scripture, the teenager on the bus whose eyes have the thunder of 1,000 unexpressed poems. Everyone is full of borrowed weather. This doesn't excuse cruelty. It makes condemnation less addictive. You can still say no. You can still fight for what matters. But you fight the system, not the sky. You challenge the script, not the soul. You learn to see the frightened child behind the confident slogan. You keep your tenderness even when you are fierce. Watts loved to blur the border between the personal and the cosmic. He would gesture toward the horizon and say, without blinking, that the universe is playing hide and seek with itself. It hides as you and me, as grammar and family, as traffic and thunderstorms. It seeks by peeking through the very attention you're using to hear this sentence. If that's true, and he asked you to test it in your bones, not to believe it out of politeness, then of course, your thoughts aren't entirely yours. They are a current in the river of being. The miracle is not that you can arrest the river. The miracle is that you can learn to swim so well that occasionally the river remembers its own clarity in you. In practice, this learning is not mystical. It looks like slowing down when your mind speeds up, like breathing on purpose when your story gets tight, like putting your phone in another room and standing at a window while your heart catches up to your head. It looks like noticing you're rehearsing an imaginary argument and laughing at the theatricality of it. It looks like refusing to use your intelligence as a tool for self-torture. It looks like forgiving yourself for the 1,000 times you forgot and started believing the radio again. It also looks like letting thought be a servant of love. You focus when focus helps. You analyze when analysis serves. You daydream when the soul needs pasture. You write, paint, fix, teach, parent, build, protest, compose not because a voice inside demands proof of your worth, but because doing is how you dance with the world. The ego that used to clutch ownership, my idea, my style, my take, relaxes into stewardship. I get to carry this for a while, it says. I get to be responsible for this garden patch. Ownership shrinks your field. Care expands it. There will be days when the mind storms so hard that every window rattles. On those days, don't pretend you are above the weather. Get low. Drink water. Tell someone the truth. Crack a joke if you can. It unarms the tyrant. Remember that the thought that says, "This is forever," is only the loudest. Other thoughts are waiting their turn. Sometimes they need silence to gather courage. Sometimes they need you to put your feet on the ground and feel that gravity is not a metaphor. It is a promise. If all this sounds like a retreat from responsibility, look closer. When the inner manager stops claiming to author every thought, responsibility becomes cleaner. You are accountable for what you do with the thoughts that pass through. You become a better custodian. You edit more compassionately and more rigorously. You catch yourself before you weaponize a fragment of pain into a performance of power. You start telling the truth sooner. I don't know. I was wrong. I'm scared. I love you. These sentences are not a brand strategy. They are a homecoming. A quiet revolution also unfolds in how you listen. You listen to people with less hunger to be right. You listen to your body when it says enough. You listen to spaces, to pauses, to the way a room changes when a certain story ends. You notice that thought is not the only intelligence in you. There is gut, skin, breath, muscle, bone, mood. There is the intelligence of rest. There is the intelligence of laughter at your own intensity. There is the intelligence of walking without earbuds and letting birdsong, distant sirens, human fragments sow threads across the edge of your attention. And there is the intelligence of death. Not the drama of it, the bare fact. You will leave. Your thoughts will go quiet. The stories you defended will dissolve into other people's stories. This is not an argument for nihilism. It is a reminder that the mind's claim to private ownership is hilariously temporary. Knowing that, you can hold your thoughts like you hold a child's hand when crossing a street firmly, gently, ready to let go when it's time. You don't drag the child. You don't pretend the street isn't there. You go together. You look both ways. You live. So what is truly yours, if not the thoughts? Not possession, participation, the way you meet what arises, the flavor of your attention, the steadiness of your kindness, the courage of your play, the willingness to be surprised by a sentence that wasn't on your schedule, to laugh at a fear that no longer pays rent, to say yes when the dance calls for a step you never rehearsed. This is not a philosophy to frame above a couch. It is a kitchen practice, a street practice, a bus stop practice. It belongs to you the way music belongs to a dancer while the song lasts. Alan Watts would hear this and, I think, raise an eyebrow as if to say, well, what did you expect? The universe has been improvising since the first atom wondered how to be a star. You are a late chapter in a very old jam session. Be proud of your licks. Know where you learned them. Don't pretend you invented rhythm. Dance anyway. Leave tonight with a trouble that's gentler than the one you came in with. Not, how do I stop thinking? Not, how do I own my thoughts? But how do I listen so closely that I stop confusing the echo for the mountain? If you do, the mountain might answer. Not with a voice, not with an epiphany, but with the solidity under your feet, the breath in your lungs, the unremarkable miracle that the kettle boils when you ask it to, that clouds move even when you are certain nothing ever changes, that the day makes space for you whether or not you produce a single perfect sentence. When your thoughts aren't really yours, you have room to belong to something larger and closer. You belong to the light falling across your table. You belong to the laugh you didn't plan. You belong to the people whose voices are gentle enough to keep you human. You belong to a world that keeps thinking itself into rivers and cities and songs and questions, one of which is this one, passing through you now like weather that remembers your name. If this opened your eyes, subscribe to Boring History, because the truth is never boring.